My name is Cecilia, 32 years old, and my family has always seen me as the disappointing one. When I saw the group text about an emergency meeting to discuss my jobless situation, I almost laughed. If only they knew I was about to announce a $1.5 billion acquisition of my tech company. 5 years of condescension were about to end in the most satisfying way possible. Before I tell you how my family's jaws dropped when they learned about my success, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more stories about proving doubters wrong. I grew up in a traditional Boston family where predictability was prized above all else. My father, Robert, was an accountant at the same firm for 30 years, methodically climbing the corporate ladder until he reached middle management. My mother, Teresa, taught high school English for her entire career. Their lives were stable, conventional, and exactly what they wanted for their 3 children. My 2 older brothers followed the script perfectly. Nicholas became a civil engineer, married his college sweetheart, and settled in a suburb just 20 minutes from our parents. Thomas went to law school, joined a respectable firm, and purchased a colonial-style house with a white picket fence in the same neighborhood as our childhood home. They were the golden children, the ones who did everything right according to our family values. Then there was me, Cecilia, the youngest and the only daughter. From childhood, I was different. While my brothers collected sports trophies and perfect report cards, I was tinkering with computers and dreaming up business ideas. At 12, I built websites for neighborhood businesses. At 16, I created an online marketplace for students to exchange textbooks that spread to 3 local high schools. "That's a cute hobby," my father would say, patting my head. "But make sure it doesn't interfere with your studies. You need to focus on getting into a good college." College was where our paths really diverged. My parents expected me to pursue law like Thomas, or perhaps medicine. Instead, I chose to study business with a focus on technology entrepreneurship. The disappointment was palpable. "Business is so general," my mother said. Her lips pursed. "What kind of job will you even get with that?" "Something practical and stable," I hope my father added. To appease them after graduation, I took a job at a respected tech firm. For 3 years, I worked my way up from junior product manager to team lead. My family finally seemed satisfied. I had benefits, a retirement plan, and a title they could brag about to their friends. But I was miserable. Every day felt like wearing shoes that were 2 sizes too small. The corporate bureaucracy suffocated my creativity. The endless meetings and political maneuvering drained my energy. I watched as my ideas were diluted through committees or worse appropriated by senior managers. Meanwhile, the technology landscape was evolving rapidly, and I saw opportunities everywhere that my company was too slow to pursue. At 27, after months of working nights and weekends on my business plan, I made the decision that would scandalize my family. I quit my good job to start my own company. The Sunday dinner when I announced my decision remains seared in my memory. My father choked on his roast beef. My mother dropped her fork with a clatter. Nicholas stared at me like I had announced plans to join the circus. "You did what my father finally managed to say." "I left Global Tech to start my own company," I repeated. "I've been developing a new approach to data security that smaller businesses can actually afford." "So, you're unemployed," Thomas concluded, exchanging knowing glances with our parents. "No, I'm self-employed. I'm an entrepreneur." "Honey," my mother said, reaching for my hand, "being between jobs is nothing to be ashamed of. Thomas knows someone in HR at his firm. I'm sure they could find something for you." And that set the tone for the next 5 years. Every family gathering became an inquisition about my employment status. My parents called weekly to ask if I'd found a real job yet. Nicholas regularly sent me job listings for entry-level positions. Thomas offered monthly to put in a good word at his law firm for administrative roles. "You know, Cecilia," my mother would say during our calls, "security is so important. Look at Nicholas and Thomas. They never have to worry about paying their bills or health insurance." My father took a more direct approach. "Have you thought about your retirement every year you waste on this project? Is a year you're not contributing to a 401 Kelvin." Over time, I learned to be vague about my work. When they asked how business was going, I would shrug and say I'm making it work or still figuring things out. It was easier than explaining the details, only to have them dismissed. The emotional distance grew. I stopped sharing my small victories and breakthroughs. When I secured my first major client, I celebrated with a bottle of champagne alone in my apartment, rather than call my family. When I hired my first employee, the only congratulations came from my college roommate and a former colleague who had believed in me enough to join my venture. Holiday gatherings became exercises in patience. I would sit quietly as my brothers discussed their promotions and bonuses, their growing 401 Kelvin balances and company stock options. My parents beamed with pride at their sons while shooting concerned glances my way. "Cecilia is still doing her computer thing," my mother would explain to relatives, with the same tone one might use to describe an unfortunate medical condition. The subtle digs accumulated like paper cuts. At my 30th birthday dinner, Thomas asked if I needed help with the bill, assuming I couldn't afford my own celebration. When I moved to a new apartment, my father insisted on reviewing the lease to make sure I wasn't being taken advantage of in my situation. Nicholas once introduced me to his friend as my little sister who's trying to figure out her career. Each slight reinforced my determination to succeed, but also deepened the wound of familial rejection. The people who should have been my biggest supporters had become my most consistent doubters. And despite all my professional growth, a part of me still craved their approval, still wanted to prove them wrong in the most undeniable way possible. Little did they know that opportunity was about to present itself in a way none of us could have imagined. The early days of Innovate Tech Solutions were exactly what my family feared. I worked from my studio apartment, converted my dining table into a desk, and subsisted largely on ramen noodles and coffee. My savings dwindled as I poured everything into developing my data security platform. The first client was a local bakery chain needing to secure customer payment information. The owner took a chance on me after a larger security firm quoted them a price that would have consumed their entire annual tech budget. I built a custom solution at a quarter of the cost, working 80-hour weeks to deliver it. Word spread among small business owners. A boutique clothing store came next, then a regional accounting firm, followed by a chain of fitness studios. Each client presented unique challenges, forcing me to innovate and expand my system's capabilities. I reinvested every dollar of profit back into the business. 18 months after founding Innovate Tech, I secured a meeting with Horizon Ventures, a venture capital firm known for backing innovative startups. I rehearsed my pitch for weeks, refining my business plan and growth projections until I could recite them in my sleep. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. It lasted 4. 3 weeks later, Horizon offered $3 million in funding for a 15% stake in my company. The validation was intoxicating. For the first time, someone with significant financial expertise looked at my business and saw not a risky experiment, but a valuable investment. With funding came growth. I moved operations from my apartment to a small office space and hired 5 employees. 6 months later, we expanded to a team of 15 and moved again. The following year, we reached 50 employees, and secured our first major enterprise client, a retail chain with over 200 locations nationwide. Our breakthrough product was Secure Shield, a scalable security platform that adapted to businesses of all sizes. Unlike competitors that offered one-size-fits-all solutions or prohibitively expensive custom systems, Secure Shield could grow with a company offering affordable entry points and seamless scaling options. When data breaches began making headlines, our client list exploded. 3 years after that first VC investment, Innovate Tech employed over 200 people across 3 offices. We had clients in 48 states and 6 countries. Our annual revenue exceeded $70 million, and the company valuation had reached $300 million. I hired Jordan as my executive assistant during this growth phase. Smart, efficient, and fiercely loyal, she quickly became my right hand, managing my chaotic schedule and serving as gatekeeper to the increasing demands on my time. She was also one of the few people who knew about my family situation, having witnessed my muted reactions to their condescending texts and calls. "Why don't you just tell them?" she asked, once, after overhearing a particularly frustrating call with my mother. "Because they wouldn't believe it," I replied, "or they'd find some way to diminish it. It's just a phase. I got lucky. The bubble will burst. I've heard it all before." The truth was more complicated. Part of me feared their rejection of my success would hurt more than their dismissal of my struggles. Another part wanted vindication so complete it would be impossible to deny. And perhaps the most painful admission, I worried that once they knew I was successful, they would only value me for my money rather than understanding my passion and vision. So I maintained the charade. When featured in Business Insider as one of the top 30 entrepreneurs, under 30, I didn't send the article to my family. When invited to speak at tech conferences, I didn't share the video links. When photographed with industry leaders at innovation summits, I kept the images off social media where relatives might see them. At family gatherings, I deflected questions about work with practiced vagueness. "Business is picking up," I would say, or "we're working on some interesting projects." If pressed, I would mention working with local businesses on computer security terminology, deliberately chosen to sound small and unthreatening. The irony became increasingly absurd. My brothers would offer financial advice while I managed a multi-million-dollar budget. My father would lecture me about career stability while I created hundreds of jobs. My mother would worry about my health insurance while I provided premium coverage for my entire workforce. At my cousin's wedding, my grandmother patted my hand and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. Not everyone blooms early. You'll find your path." I thanked her politely, not mentioning that I had just closed a $20 million round of funding that morning. The isolation weighed on me. Success without the ability to share it with loved ones felt hollow at times. I built a network of fellow entrepreneurs who understood the unique pressures of building a company, but the family-shaped hole remained. Then came the offer from Global Systems, a tech giant looking to strengthen their security division. Their initial approach was tentative, just executives inquiring if I might consider acquisition discussions. As talks progressed over weeks, the numbers grew increasingly serious. What began as a theoretical conversation crystallized into a concrete offer, $1.5 billion, with provisions for me to remain CEO of what would become their security division. The due diligence process was exhausting, with teams of lawyers and accountants examining every aspect of Innovate Tech. Jordan managed the chaos, masterfully coordinating document transfers and scheduling the endless meetings while shielding me from unnecessary disruptions. After 2 months of negotiations, we reached the final stage. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday, the press release was drafted, the celebration for employees was planned. 5 years of work was about to culminate in one of the largest tech acquisitions of the year. And that's when my family decided we needed an emergency meeting about my joblessness. Friday morning found me in my penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor, reviewing the final acquisition documents with our legal team. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city where I had grown up, feeling small and misunderstood. Now I commanded a view from above, a physical manifestation of how far I had come. My phone buzzed with a notification. Normally, I would ignore it during such an important meeting, but a glance showed it was the Family Matters group chat. Something in me always responded to those notifications with a Pavlovian mix of dread and hope. I excused myself and stepped away from the conference table to check the message. My father had written in all caps, "Emergency meeting tonight. We need to discuss your jobless situation." Before I could process this, more messages appeared. "Mom, sweetie, we're all worried sick about your future. It's been 5 years of this business experiment. Please come over at 7 p.m. We just want to help." Nicholas found some entry-level marketing positions that might work for someone with your unconventional background. We'll bring the listings tonight. Thomas, actually, our receptionist, just gave notice. No experience necessary, and the benefits are excellent. We can discuss tonight. I stared at my phone, emotions crashing through me in waves. First came the hurt, as familiar as an old scar that never fully healed. Then, anger bubbled up hot and clarifying. Frustration followed, not just with them, but with myself, for still caring what they thought. The messages triggered memories of every dismissive comment, every condescending offer of help, every pained expression when explaining my career choice to others. I remembered Christmas dinner 3 years ago, when my father had raised his glass in a toast to Nicholas's promotion to senior engineer, to Thomas, making partner, and to Cecilia. "Well, we're sure next year will be your year to finally find your path." Actually, I had started to say, "My company just secured a major client that will double our revenue," but my mother had quickly jumped in. "Let's not talk business at Christmas, dear. Thomas, tell us more about the Parker case." Then there was the family vacation to Cape Cod last summer. My brothers discussed investment strategies while I sat quietly on the deck. When I tried to join the conversation, Thomas patted my shoulder. "Don't worry about this boring financial stuff, sis. We know money's tight for you." I had been in the process of purchasing a multi-million-dollar office building that week. Most painful was my grandmother's 80th birthday when Aunt Linda asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Cecilia is in computers. It's very creative. We're so proud of her for trying." The conversation quickly turned to my cousin's new position at a prestigious hospital. Standing in my office, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my success that my family had never seen, I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. Why did their opinion still matter? Why, after building something so significant, did I still crave their validation? I started typing several responses, deleting each one. "Actually, I'm quite successful." Delete. "I run a multi-million-dollar company." Delete. "Maybe you should Google me before assuming I'm unemployed." Delete. The truth was, words alone wouldn't change their perception. They had 5 years of dismissing my business as a hobby, a phase, a delay in starting my real career. They had built a narrative about me as the struggling youngest child who couldn't quite get it together, and that story was comfortable for them. It positioned them as the wise, stable ones, and me as needing their guidance. Breaking that narrative would require more than a text message. It would require evidence they couldn't ignore or minimize. And suddenly, with perfect timing, the universe had provided exactly that opportunity. I took a deep breath and typed, "I'll be there at 7." Returning to the conference table, I found it difficult to focus on the acquisition details. The legal team noticed my distraction but attributed it to pre-announcement nerves. Only Jordan, observing from the corner, could read the tension in my shoulders and jaw. She approached as the meeting concluded. "Everything okay?" I showed her the family chat. Her eyebrows rose as she read the messages. "Are you serious? Today of all days?" Apparently, the universe has a flair for dramatic timing. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the messages again, years of accumulated hurt crystallizing into determination. "I'm going to attend their emergency meeting." The irony was almost too perfect. On the day of my greatest professional triumph, my family had decided to intervene about my perceived failure. The disconnect between their image of me and reality had never been so stark, so laughably wrong, and so painful. I had spent years downplaying my success, deflecting their concerns, and enduring their pity. The weight of being misunderstood by the people who should know you best is a unique kind of loneliness. Despite the friends, colleagues, and employees who respected me, there remained a hollow space where family validation should have been. As I prepared for both the board meeting and the family confrontation, I felt emotionally exhausted. Why did I still need their approval? I had proven myself by every objective measure of success. I had created something valuable, employed hundreds of people, and was about to close a historic deal. Yet some childlike part of me still wanted my parents to put my achievement on the refrigerator door. The board meeting was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. The family intervention at 7. The timing was tight but manageable, and perhaps for the first time, I was ready to let worlds collide. Back at my desk, I stared at my phone. The family chat still open. The screen dimmed from inactivity, then went dark, as if sensing the heaviness of my thoughts. How should I handle tonight? Walk in quietly and endure their intervention. Present them with magazine articles and business valuations. Send a corporate gift basket with a note saying, "Sorry I can't make it, too busy running my $1 billion company." My reflection in the darkened phone screen looked tired, not from the acquisition process, but from years of emotional labor navigating family relationships where I was perpetually misunderstood. The phone lit up with an incoming call. Jordan's name flashed on the screen. I answered, putting it on speaker as I continued reviewing documents. "Miss Cecilia," she said, her voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "The board is ready for your $1.5 billion acquisition announcement. They're waiting in the main conference room, and Global Systems CEO just arrived. The press release is finalized, and the communications team is standing by for your approval to distribute it at market close." She continued with more details. "The champagne is chilled for the employee announcement, and I've confirmed reservations for the executive dinner at Harrington's. Also, Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal have all requested exclusive interviews following the public announcement." As Jordan spoke, an idea formed in my mind, crystallizing with perfect clarity. I glanced at the family chat again, then back at the acquisition documents on my desk. "Jordan," I said, "I need a favor. After the board meeting, could you call me at exactly 7:15 p.m. with an update on the Global Systems CEO's comments? It's important." "Of course," she replied, professional, as always, despite the unusual request. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I said. "My family has called an emergency meeting tonight to discuss my joblessness. I think it's time they learned what I actually do." Jordan's brief silence spoke volumes. She had seen the text messages, heard the condescending voicemails, witnessed my quietness after family gatherings. 7:15 exactly, she confirmed. I'll make it appropriately formal. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift slightly. And Jordan, make sure the call covers specific details about the acquisition amount and my role moving forward. With pleasure, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. With that decided, I quickly texted the family group, I'll be there at 7. Short, simple, giving away nothing. The responses came immediately. Mom, thank you, sweetie. We'll have dinner ready. Dad, good. This is important. Nicholas bringing some resources for you. Thomas, smart decision, sis. Each message carried the same patronizing tone that had colored our interactions for years, but tonight would be different. Tonight, the dynamic would shift irrevocably. I moved through the afternoon with renewed purpose. The board meeting was a success with unanimous approval of the acquisition. The Global Systems CEO spoke about the visionary security approach that had made Innovate Tech an irresistible addition to their portfolio. The company-wide announcement was met with cheers and applause from employees who would all receive bonuses from the deal. Through it all, part of my mind remained fixed on the evening ahead. As the business celebrations wound down, I went to my private bathroom to change. I removed my standard office attire and put on what I privately called my power suit, a tailored black Armani that projected quiet confidence. I refreshed my makeup and straightened my shoulders. The woman in the mirror looked successful, confident, powerful. Would my family finally see it, or would they look at the same woman they'd always seen? A little girl playing business, waiting to grow up and get a real job. The drive to my parents' suburban home took 40 minutes each mile, bringing a new memory. Passing my old high school, I remembered my father's lukewarm response to the Student Business Award I'd received senior year. Nice hobby, but focus on college applications. Driving by Boston University, I recalled my mother's disappointment when I changed my major from pre-law to business. Such a broad, unfocused degree. As familiar streets gave way to the tree-lined avenue of my childhood, I rehearsed potential scenarios. Would they be angry when they discovered I'd hidden my success? Would they suddenly become supportive after years of doubt? Would they try to take credit, somehow? We always believed in you seemed like the most likely revision of history. I questioned whether my approach was healthy. Was I being petty, orchestrating a dramatic revelation, perhaps? But after years of having my achievements dismissed, and my passion treated as a phase, perhaps I had earned a moment of vindication. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same manicured lawns, same tasteful holiday decorations, adorning doorways. I pulled into my parents' driveway behind Nicholas's BMW and Thomas's Mercedes. My own car, a Tesla Model S, looked somewhat out of place, but I doubted they would notice. They had long ago stopped seeing evidence that contradicted their narrative about me. Sitting in my car, I took deep breaths to center myself. This confrontation wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about being seen for who I truly was, about standing firm in my own reality after years of having it denied. It was about breaking free from the role I'd been assigned in our family drama: unsuccessful daughter, perpetual disappointment, cautionary tale. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. All set for 7:15. Go get 'em, boss. With one final deep breath, I gathered my courage and stepped out of the car. Whatever happened inside that house, our family dynamic would never be the same. And maybe that was exactly what we all needed. I rang the doorbell of my childhood home, a strange formality for a place where I had once had a key, but it felt appropriate for the occasion. My mother opened the door, her expression a practiced mixture of concern and disappointment that I'd seen countless times. "Cecilia, sweetie," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more obligatory than warm. "Come in. Everyone's waiting." The living room had been arranged like an intervention, which I supposed it was. My father occupied his usual armchair reading glasses, perched on his nose, as he reviewed what appeared to be notes. Nicholas and Thomas sat side by side on the couch, a united front of brotherly concern. Between them on the coffee table lay folders and printouts, various resources for my apparent jobless situation. "Right on time," my father said, checking his watch with approval. Punctuality was among the few virtues he consistently acknowledged in me. I took the lone chair, positioned across from them, feeling like a defendant facing a tribunal. The setup was designed consciously or not to establish authority and create pressure. I had used similar arrangements in tough negotiations, though never with family. My father cleared his throat and began what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "Cecilia, we've called this family meeting because we're concerned. It's been 5 years since you left a stable position at a reputable company to pursue this entrepreneurial experiment." He emphasized the word as if it were a phase like a teenager's goth period. At some point, we need to acknowledge when something isn't working and make appropriate adjustments. My mother reached over to squeeze my hand. "Sweetie, there's no shame in admitting it didn't work out. Everyone has setbacks." Nicholas leaned forward, opening a folder. "I've compiled some job listings that might be a good fit. They're entry level, but with your background, you could advance quickly." "The job market is competitive," Thomas added, "but with family connections, we can get your foot in the door." He slid a printout toward me. "Our firm needs a new receptionist. It's not glamorous, but the benefits are excellent, and you'd be working in a professional environment again." I sat quietly absorbing their words without interruption. The assumptions layered in their statements were staggering. They had constructed an entire narrative about my life and career without once asking substantive questions about what I actually did. They mistook my silence for shame or acceptance. My father continued his voice, taking on the authoritative tone he used when dispensing financial wisdom. "Your mother and I have been subsidizing your apartment for long enough. This was news to me as I had never taken money from them. It's time to face reality. This business experiment has failed. There's no market for whatever website service you've been trying to sell." My mother nodded sympathetically. "Do you need money for rent again this month, dear?" she asked, though I had never asked them for rent money. I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm and measured. "Have any of you ever actually researched my company, Innovate Tech Solutions? Even a simple Google search?" The question seemed to confuse them. My father waved his hand dismissively. "We know it's some kind of website business, computer stuff. Very small scale. Local clients only write," Nicholas added his tone, suggesting this was a limitation rather than a choice. "Something about security for online shops," Thomas guessed vaguely. Before I could respond, my phone rang. I checked the time, 7:15 exactly. Jordan was nothing if not precise. "Excuse me, I need to take this," I said, answering the call and putting it on speaker. "Jordan, I'm with my family. You're on speaker." Jordan's crisp, professional voice filled the room. "Miss Cecilia, the board is ready for your $1.5 billion acquisition announcement. The Global Systems CEO is asking if you want to make any changes to the press release before it goes live to the markets tomorrow morning. He specifically wants to highlight your continued role as CEO of their new security division and the retention of all 237 Innovate Tech employees." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's mouth hung slightly open, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. My mother's hand froze midway to her teacup. Nicholas stared at the phone as if it had suddenly started speaking in tongues. Thomas blinked rapidly, his brain visibly struggling to reconcile this information with his understanding of reality. "Thank you, Jordan," I replied calmly. "Please tell him the press release is approved as written. I'll be available for the media calls starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow." "Has the employees' celebration package been finalized?" "Yes, Miss Cecilia. All employees will receive their acquisition bonuses with tomorrow's announcement ranging from $10,000 for our newest team members to $2 million for the executive team, as you specified." "Excellent. And the charitable foundation?" "The paperwork is complete. The Innovate Tech Foundation will launch with an initial endowment of $50 million focused on technology education for underserved communities." "Perfect. Thank you, Jordan. I'll call you back later." I ended the call and placed my phone on the coffee table directly on top of the receptionist's job listing Thomas had prepared for me. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in stunned silence. 1.5 billion. My father finally managed the words coming out, as if each one required separate processing. "Your company was acquired," my mother asked, her voice faint. "You have 200 employees," Nicholas added, incredulous. Thomas simply opened and closed his mouth, like a fish out of water. The moment was everything I had imagined, and more. The shocked expressions, the disbelief giving way to dawning comprehension. But instead of satisfaction, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, yes, but also sadness for the years of support. I had missed anger at being so thoroughly misunderstood and a strange sense of liberation. "Yes," I said simply. "Innovate Tech Solutions, the company I founded 5 years ago after leaving Global Tech, has been acquired by Global Systems for $1.5 billion. We specialize in scalable security solutions for businesses of all sizes, from local shops to international corporations. We have 237 employees across 3 offices, clients in 48 states and 6 countries, and annual revenue exceeding $70 million. I let the information sink in before continuing, my voice gaining strength. "For 5 years I've built this company while you all assumed I was failing. For 5 years I've listened to your condescending advice, your pitying offers of help, your dismissal of my career as a hobby or a phase. Not once did any of you actually ask about my business in a way that showed genuine interest. Not once did you Google my company or check any business news where I've been featured repeatedly." The dam had broken, and years of pent-up feelings came pouring out. Do you know what it's like to create something successful and not be able to share it with your family? To sit at holiday dinners, listening to financial advice from people who manage a fraction of the budget you do? To have your mother introduce you as still trying to figure things out when you're running a multi-million-dollar company? My father attempted to regain control of the situation. "Now, Cecilia, we were just concerned about you. If you had told us—" "I tried," I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Remember when I mentioned securing a major client at Christmas 3 years ago? Mom changed the subject to Thomas's law firm. Remember when I tried to join the investment conversation at the Cape? Thomas told me not to worry my pretty little head about boring financial stuff. Every time I started to share something about my company, you all made it clear you weren't interested unless it involved me giving up and getting a real job." I turned to each family member in turn, addressing specific memories. "Dad, when I won the Innovator of the Year award last year, I called to tell you, and you spent the entire conversation telling me about Nicholas's new deck. Mom, when my company was featured in Business Insider, I emailed you the article, and you replied asking if I'd considered going back to school for a teaching certificate like you. Nicholas, You've sent me entry-level job listings every month for 5 years without once asking if I actually needed a job. And Thomas, you've offered me administrative positions at your firm so many times I've lost count, always with that same condescending smile. The room was silent, except for my breathing, which had become ragged with emotion. My family looked shell-shocked, their worldview visibly crumbling around them. "Why didn't you just tell us how successful you were?" my mother finally asked in a small voice. The question ignited a fresh wave of frustration. Why did I have to? Why couldn't you have believed in me from the beginning? Why did you assume I was failing without evidence? Do you have any idea how much it hurts to have your family consistently think the worst of you? My words hung in the air, heavy, with years of accumulated pain. The confrontation I had imagined so many times was finally happening, but instead of feeling triumphant, I felt drained. The truth was out, but the damage of years of dismissal couldn't be undone with one dramatic revelation. My father adjusted his glasses, visibly struggling to process the new reality. "We had no idea," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "You always downplayed everything. You said you were making it work or figuring things out. Because every time I tried to share more, you made it clear you weren't interested unless it fit your definition of success." I replied, the fight draining from my voice. After a while, it was easier to say nothing than to have my achievements dismissed. We had reached the moment of truth, the point where our family dynamic would either begin to heal or fracture beyond repair. The ball was in their court now. How they responded would determine the path forward. A heavy silence filled the room after my emotional outburst. No one seemed to know what to say next. The family script had been shattered, leaving us all without familiar lines to fall back on. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, marking seconds that felt like hours. My father was the first to attempt recovery, his accountant's mind seemingly grappling with the numbers I had presented. 1.5 billion, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Cecilia, that's extraordinary. But surely you understand our concern. We were just worried about you." It was a classic Robert Davis move, trying to reframe his actions as parental concern rather than acknowledging the judgment and dismissal. I had expected this, but it still stung. "Dad, there's a difference between concern and condescension," I said quietly. "You weren't worried about me. You were embarrassed by what you perceived as my failure." My mother dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a tissue. "That's not fair, Cecilia. We love you. We only want what's best for you." "The best, according to whose definition?" I asked. "Did you ever consider that I might have a different vision for my life than what you wanted for me?" Nicholas shuffled his folder of job listings awkwardly. "I thought I was helping," he muttered. Thomas, always the lawyer, tried a different approach. "You have to admit you were secretive about your work. How were we supposed to know you were building something substantial?" "By asking," I said simply. "By showing genuine interest. By Googling my company name, which would have shown dozens of articles and industry awards. By treating me like an adult capable of making her own decisions rather than a child who needed intervention." The initial shock was wearing off, making way for a complex mix of emotions around the room. My father looked both proud and uncomfortable, clearly calculating how to incorporate this new information into his worldview. My mother appeared torn between joy at my success and hurt at being excluded from it. My brothers showed a combination of amazement and what looked suspiciously like jealousy. We broke into smaller conversations as the evening progressed. My mother drew me into the kitchen ostensibly to check on dinner, but clearly seeking a private moment. "Cecilia, I had no idea," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "All this time, we thought." I know what you thought, Mom. That's the problem. She busied herself with stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. I don't understand why you kept it secret. Weren't you proud? Didn't you want to share your success with us? The question revealed the vast gulf in our perspectives. Of course I was proud. Of course I wanted to share it. I tried repeatedly, but you and Dad had already decided my business wasn't serious. Every time I mentioned a milestone, it was dismissed or ignored. I never meant to dismiss you, she said, looking genuinely distressed. I just didn't understand what you were doing. Technology is so different from anything in my experience. You never tried to understand, I pointed out gently. You never asked questions about my work. You never showed interest in learning about my industry. She set down the spoon and turned to face me directly. I'm sorry, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. I should have tried harder to understand your world. I worried. Self-employment seemed so precarious. It can be, I acknowledged. The early days were tough, but that's when I needed support most, not judgment. Can we start over? She asked tentatively. I want to understand now. It was a small olive branch, but a meaningful one. I'd like that, I said. Meanwhile, my father had called me into his study, a room that had always been the site of serious financial discussions and lectures on responsibility. I have to ask, he said, leaning against his desk. Why didn't you come to me for business advice? I have 40 years of financial experience. I suppressed a sigh. Even now he couldn't quite grasp that his expertise in traditional corporate accounting didn't necessarily translate to tech startups. Dad, would you ask a cardiac surgeon for advice on neurosurgery? They're both doctors, but different specialties. He frowned. That's hardly the same thing. It is, though. Your experience is valuable, but it's in a completely different business model. When I tried to explain my company's approach to scaling and customer acquisition, you told me it sounded risky and unsustainable. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I suppose I was looking at it through the lens of traditional business. Exactly. And instead of trying to understand my industry, you assumed I didn't know what I was doing. He was quiet for a moment. An unusual state for my typically authoritative father. I projected my own fears onto you, he finally admitted. I spent my career in the safety of an established firm. The idea of building something from nothing terrified me. I couldn't understand why anyone would choose that uncertainty. It was perhaps the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. Thank you for saying that, I replied, genuinely touched by his vulnerability. You've achieved something remarkable, he continued. Something I never had the courage to attempt. Another pause. I'm proud of you, Cecilia. I should have said that years ago. The conversation with Nicholas was more strained. He paced the back patio, clearly struggling with the revelation that his little sister had dramatically outpaced his own carefully planned career progression. So you're what, some kind of millionaire now, he asked, trying to sound casual, but not quite masking the competitive edge in his voice. The company valuation and my ownership stake are a bit more complicated than that, I replied, deliberately vague. Financial details would only feed his tendency to compare and rank. I was just trying to help with the job listings, he said defensively. I know. But did you ever wonder why I never responded to them? Or why I never seemed interested in the positions you suggested? He shrugged. I figured you were too proud to admit you needed help. Nicholas, I've employed hundreds of people. I've created jobs, not needed them. Did it never occur to you that my lack of interest might be because I was doing fine on my own? How would I know that you never talked about your work? Because every time I did, you changed the subject or sent me another job listing the next day. It was pretty clear you weren't listening. He had no response to that, and we stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Thomas approached me, last his legal training, evident in his carefully chosen words. "You have to understand our perspective," he began, ever the litigator. "From what you shared, which was minimal, your business seemed small and struggling. It was reasonable for us to be concerned. Would you have been equally concerned if I had shown more external signs of success?" I asked. "If I had bragged about client acquisitions and revenue milestones at every family dinner?" He hesitated. "Probably not," he admitted. "Then it wasn't really concern about my welfare, was it? It was concern about how my perceived failure reflected on the family." Thomas had always hated losing arguments. "That's not entirely fair." "Maybe not. But it's not entirely unfair either, is it?" As the evening wore on, the initial shock and defensive responses gradually gave way to more genuine exchanges. Not all were positive. Some relationships were too damaged for one revelation to repair, but each conversation represented a first step towards something new. Before leaving, I established clear boundaries. "I'm willing to build a new relationship with each of you," I told them, as we gathered in the living room again. "But it has to be based on mutual respect. I won't accept any more condescension or unsolicited advice about my career." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair. And I want actual interest in my work," I continued. "Not just now that you know it's successful, but genuine curiosity about what I do and why it matters to me." "We can do that," my mother said, though Thomas looked less certain. As I drove home that night, I felt both lighter and heavier. The secret I had carried for years was finally out, removing that burden. But the raw conversations had exposed just how deep the family dysfunction ran and how much work lay ahead if we wanted to build healthier relationships. Some connections might never fully heal. Others might grow stronger through this crisis. All had been irrevocably changed by the truth finally spoken aloud. The official acquisition announcement the next morning was a blur of activity. I stood beside the global systems CEO at a press conference, smiled for photographs with the executive team, and gave interviews to major business publications. Industry analysts praised the deal as transformative for both companies. The business world celebrated what my family had never even acknowledged. The employee celebration was emotional in a different way. Many had been with me since the early days, working long hours in cramped quarters, believing in the vision when we had more determination than resources. Announcing their acquisition bonuses and seeing their tearful reactions reminded me of what true support looked like. People who had actually shown up, contributed, and believed. That evening, I returned to my penthouse alone. The contrast between the public acclaim and the private family drama left me emotionally exhausted. I kicked off my heels, poured a glass of wine, and sank onto my sofa, gazing out at the city lights. My phone chimed with a notification. Opening it, I found a text from my mother, a screenshot of a Wall Street Journal article about the acquisition with the simple message, "I'm proud of you." It was a small gesture, perhaps, but significant, coming from a woman who had spent years suggesting teaching certificates and administrative positions. I sent back a simple thank you. The weeks that followed brought a gradual recalibration of family relationships. My father, ever practical, adapted most quickly. He began sending articles about technology trends and asking specific questions about my business model. Though his understanding of the industry remained limited, his effort to engage was genuine. "I've been reading about data security protocols," he announced during our first post-revelation phone call. "Fascinating stuff, much more complex than I realized." My mother took a different approach, focusing more on my well-being than my business achievements. "Are you eating properly? Getting enough sleep? Running a company that size must be stressful. It was still mothering, but without the underlying assumption that I needed career guidance. Nicholas struggled the most with the new dynamic. Our conversations remained awkward, his competitive nature clearly unsettled by my success. "So what's next after the acquisition retirement?" he asked, once unable to imagine continuing to work after such a windfall. "I'm 32, Nicholas. I'm just getting started," I replied. Thomas maintained professional courtesy but emotional distance. The lawyer in him had gracefully acknowledged defeat in the face of overwhelming evidence, but the brother in him seemed unable to reconcile his image of his little sister with the successful CEO I had become. Family Sunday dinners gradually resumed, though with a markedly different tone. No longer was I the subject of concerned glances and career advice. Instead, I often found myself bombarded with questions about business and technology, sometimes feeling like a performing seal, expected to justify my success repeatedly. "It's strange," I confided to Jordan over lunch. "Before they didn't believe in me enough. Now some of them seem almost too interested, but in the external trappings rather than the work itself." "They're still adjusting," she suggested. "They went from thinking you were unemployed to realizing you're a business leader overnight. That's a big shift." "I guess I hoped they would suddenly understand me," I admitted. "But they're the same people they always were." "And so are you," Jordan pointed out. "The question is, what kind of relationship do you want with them now?" It was a profound question, one that led me to establish clearer boundaries. I began declining some family gatherings to preserve my energy and time. When I did attend, I redirected conversations away from money and status toward more meaningful topics. I shared selectively about my work, focusing on the parts that genuinely excited me, rather than metrics and valuations. With some family members, the relationships deepened. My mother and I developed a weekly coffee ritual where we talked about everything except business. My youngest cousin, a computer science student, became something of a mentee, eager to learn from my experience in the tech world. With others, I accepted that closeness might never develop. Thomas and I maintained cordial but distant interactions. Nicholas eventually found a way to relate to me by focusing on our shared childhood memories rather than our divergent adult lives. The most important relationship I cultivated, however, was with my chosen family, the friends, colleagues, and mentors who had supported me when blood relatives couldn't or wouldn't. Jordan, who had witnessed both my struggles and triumphs, became a trusted friend beyond her role as my assistant. My early investors, who had believed in me when my own family dismissed my ambitions, remained valued advisors. I established the Innovate Tech Foundation with a focus on supporting young entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. Working with these ambitious individuals, who often faced family skepticism similar to what I had experienced, became one of my most rewarding activities. "My parents think technology is just for playing games," one young woman told me during a mentoring session. "They don't understand why I want to build a cybersecurity company." "Mine too," I said, sharing my story. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see our potential." "How did you deal with it?" she asked. "I stopped looking for validation from people who weren't equipped to give it," I replied. "I found communities that understood my vision and built support systems there." This became my mantra as I continued healing from years of familial misunderstanding. I recognized that while I had craved my family's approval, I had never actually needed it to succeed. The validation I sought had always been available elsewhere, from customers who valued our product, employees who believed in our mission, investors who recognized our potential. The process of forgiveness was neither quick nor linear. Some days I felt genuine compassion for my family's limited perspective. Other days, remembering particularly hurtful dismissals would reignite old anger. I came to understand that forgiveness wasn't a destination, but a practice, something I would continue working on as our relationships evolved. 6 months after the emergency meeting revelation, I hosted a housewarming party at my new home, a waterfront property I had purchased following the acquisition. As I looked around at the mixed gathering of family, friends, and colleagues, I noticed something interesting. My worlds had begun to integrate. My mother was chatting comfortably with Jordan. My father was engaged in conversation with one of my investors. Even Nicholas seemed to be enjoying himself free from the need to compete now that our different paths were acknowledged. Not everyone was there, Thomas had sent his regrets, and certain aunts and uncles who had been particularly dismissive weren't invited. I had learned that healing didn't require maintaining all relationships at all costs. Some connections were worth the effort of rebuilding. Others were better left in the past. That evening, standing on my terrace overlooking the water, I reflected on the journey. The pain of being misunderstood had shaped me, building resilience I might not have developed otherwise. The need to prove myself had fueled an ambition that drove me to greater heights than comfort might have. The absence of family support had forced me to create stronger external networks. Would I have preferred unconditional support from the beginning? Of course. But I had come to appreciate that my path, difficult as it was, had forged strengths I might otherwise never have discovered. The family chat that once announced an emergency meeting about my joblessness now occasionally shared articles about Innovate Tech or pictures from industry events where I was speaking. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. More importantly, I had stopped measuring my worth by their perception of me. True self-worth, I had learned, comes from within, from knowing your own value, regardless of whether others recognize it. Success isn't just about proving doubters wrong, though that satisfaction is undeniably sweet. It's about building something meaningful and staying true to your vision, especially when those closest to you fail to see it. Sometimes, the people who should believe in us the most are the least able to do so. And sometimes the shock of revelation is exactly what's needed to break through years of misperception and create space for something new to grow. Have you ever had to shock someone out of their false perception of you? How did it change your relationship? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding your path despite obstacles. Remember, sometimes the greatest success comes from believing in yourself when no one else will. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to stand in your truth, whether others recognize it or not.